This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh, Revi, and you're watching our weekly flagship show, The Talking Point. Our guest today is Ambassador Anil Wadhwa. He's been Secretary East in the Ministry of External Affairs, and more importantly for the topic that we're talking about, he's been the author of the CECA Australia Economic Strategy report. Thank you so much for your time, Ambassador Wadhwa.
My pleasure.
The reason that we are talking to you, of course, is also because of the 2+2, the inaugural 2+2 that's taking place between India and Australia. Defense and security, how important is it? I know now everybody is looking at what's happening in Afghanistan, but the larger issue of China and how they behaved over the last year and a half has been on the world's mind. How important is the Australia-India 2+2?
So as we know, Australia and India have a comprehensive strategic partnership now.
June last year was when it was.
Yes, so relationship has been steadily improving, especially since 2014. There's been an uptick in the relationship in all fields. Of course, trade and economics are the ones fields that we normally think about. But below the radar, there's also been a steady improvement in terms of Australian involvement in exercises with India.
Yep.
And, Australia has also participated in the Malabar exercises now. It's the first time that all 4 Quad navies have participated in Malabar, in fact. But at the same time, I think the geopolitical situation in our region, especially in Southeast Asia, has deteriorated to a certain extent because of Chinese aggressiveness. And because of the fact that Australia feels threatened by Chinese actions in that part of the world, India, as you know, has been exposed to Chinese aggression on the border. So overall, the situation as seen by both countries is something which requires joint coordination. For a while now, Australia has been pitching for 2+2 dialogue so that we can combine the dialogues in the field of foreign policy and combine that with defense.
This is at the ministerial level. You having 2+2 at what was it, joint secretary level?
It used to happen at the secretarial level, at the senior officials level. But this is the first time that's been elevated to a ministerial level. And that has a special significance. We have very few countries in the world with whom India has this kind of a dialogue. And that just goes to show how much convergence there is today between India and Australia. So the time is ripe, for that to happen. I think we will know, at the end of this dialogue, what the outcomes are. But most importantly, it is a coming together of the 4 ministers, in one platform, where you can talk comprehensively about foreign policy and security.
And it's in person. It's not online.
It is also in person, and that's very important.
Of course, the Quad in person is also expected to come up later this year. We're hearing that Prime Minister.
If it does come about, I think it's going to be another significant event. Because last time we had the Quad summit at the virtual, it was a virtual meeting. But if we do have this in person this time, it'll have a different significance.
Apart from, you mentioned the Malabar exercise, and that's happened with the Australians this time as well as last year. In the security field, now defense and space are emerging as extremely key sectors. You deal with that, I think, at least with the space sector, maybe slightly in the report as well. But since we're talking about security, I thought I'd bring that up.
Yes, because I think there is a lot of scope for working together in defense, especially as far as shipbuilding is concerned and over-the-horizon technologies are concerned. And also some cutting-edge technologies which both India and Australia have been working on for some time with third countries who are common partners. The submarine program, for example, with France is just one example. But in terms of space, there's a lot of scope for the private sector to work together, because now in India, the private sector has been opened up for component manufacturing and supply into ISRO's programs. ISRO is also diversifying and trying to rope in more partners, not just in India, but all over the world. Australia is also an ideal, provides an ideal opportunity for launches because of the situational advantage that Australia has. And of course, Australia is quite advanced in its space activities. It's just opened a new agency, which happened 2 years ago in Adelaide. and they are trying to catch up as fast as they can in this field. So this collaboration will be mutually beneficial. Most importantly, it will be important for intelligence gathering, it will be important for weather forecasting, for use in crop mapping, for instance, which again can help bilateral trade and investments between India and Australia. So I think we need to pay great attention to these fields, and that is why it's very important that Australia and India talk about how they can cooperate and then take it forward perhaps into the Quad context.
So exactly. So this is another step in what's happening with the Quad. They're coming from what? Indonesia, I think they're going to, where they had a 2+2, they're going to South Korea as well. We have our own 2+2s with France, Japan as well. And then there's going to be that Quad that we're talking about in person. So whether you say it or not, I mean, at the official level, whether it's part of the statements or not, it's because of China's aggressive behavior over the last few years that all this is developing.
Yes, I think the countries are quite concerned about what is happening by way of violation of the rule of law. And that's the most important issue here. If international law is preserved and if freedom of navigation is preserved, we will never have the need for countries to come together on such platforms and talk about common threats. So quite obviously, there is an aggressive behavior from a particular country in the region, which is the catalyst for this kind of a meeting. But even otherwise, I think between India and Australia, because the relationship has blossomed into something different at the moment, I think its time has just come. And it's important that both countries talk under this platform now so that foreign policy and security can be combined together.
Talking about blossoming or that the time has come, 2015 is when the CECA kind of stalled between India and Australia. Since then, there's been developments. I mean, the ministers have been talking, and there are indications that they're looking for whatever you want to call it, a limited free trade agreement or something before a comprehensive CECA, if you can work towards that. Why is that so important, first of all, for India and for both countries?
So we've had two reports now. One was an Australian report on India, which was done in 2018. And I myself have been instrumental in authoring a report on Australia, which is called Australia Economic Strategy Report. And that was released by Minister for Commerce and Industry in November 2020. So both these reports provide a very clear roadmap about where India and Australia should be heading. The CECA negotiations were aborted because of the RCEP negotiations which came about. Both countries were part of those negotiations. So it was thought at that time that perhaps that process should prevail and that the bilaterals can be subsumed in that overall process. But since India is not a part of the RCEP now, the CECA negotiations become very important. And why they become important? Because if you have to have a level playing field between India and Australia so that they can compete with other countries and thereby boosting trade and investments, then you need to have lowering of tariffs in certain areas. You need to have understandings as far as services side is concerned, movement of people, the fact that we have so many Indians now working as professionals in Australia, 700,000 diaspora, 90,000 Indian students currently in Australia. So it's a relationship which is, spreading out into many fields in the economic sector. Plus, very importantly, and that's very important for India and Australia, that in the Indian growth story, we need countries like Australia which can provide that high technology input so that India can develop itself rapidly. And it needs this means of rising from urbanization, from water security, food security, enhanced production with the use of techniques in mining, in agriculture, in water. All these are the current requirements in India. And Australia obviously fits the bill. It is a country which has at least 23 minerals which are needed under the Indian mineral strategy. So there are 49 of these minerals which have been identified, of which 23 can be supplied by Australia on a continuous basis, on a competitive basis, and plus the safety in mining, which Australian companies can provide. And India, on the other hand, can also fill in, some gaps in the Australian economy, especially in terms of its service personnel and again in
and not
terms
necessarily traveling there. They can, I mean, if there's Australian investment here, you can provide the services through our manpower here, right?
Yes, I mean, there are certain conditions to that. I mean, it's not as if it's an open, area right now. Both sides will have to talk about that, and that's part of the negotiations as far as CECA is concerned. But simply by bringing tariffs down in the 97 most traded items will cover 90% of our trade. And that itself will bring about a level playing field, and that's why both sides are now talking about the low-hanging fruit, which is an early harvest trade agreement, which could be followed by a fully fledged out CECA agreement, which also has, how to settle disputes, rules of origin, the services, and what to do with movement of people. So once you have that package ready, then that can come about rapidly later. But at the moment, don't forget that we have an arrangement also with Japan, which we've launched, and that happened in April 2021, where we are not talking about resilient supply chains.
And it's like a one window kind of thing. It makes
yes,
because there's a lot of worry of outside investors of the business climate here.
So no, it's actually to do with the very important reliance on commodities or products which we cannot do without, but we cannot rely on countries like China, for instance, who can turn off the tap at any point in time. And if you're assured that supplies will be there, then you set up those supply chains where you can procure the material and you can manufacture the commodity or the product, and that then feeds into your economy. So there are 2 or 3 products like that which will be required to be identified and to be worked upon. The tariffs there will have to be reduced between the 3 countries. They will have to work out something like a mini FTA where you also talk about rules of origin, settlement of disputes, for example, and make sure that these are then available for the 3 economies equally. So they'll have to choose products which are common to all 3 economies, which are traded regularly. And so currently those efforts are on at the moment.
Like you're saying, there's more of an awareness of supply chains and resilient supply chains. There's already a quad resilient supply chain initiative as well. And your report is pointing out the complementarities between Australia and India that can be worked on, say, our requirement for rare earths or minerals, and what we can give them in return. Is that...
Yes, so my report actually talks about 12 areas which are currently prominent as far as bilateral investments and trade between the 2 countries are concerned, but also 8 other sectors which are emerging sectors, which we haven't paid much attention to, which will become very important later. For example, in textiles or in sports or sports technologies, gaming and innovation, and education technologies, in water, all these are issues for the future, and where we have the potential to grow exponentially between the 2 countries. And they're also needed by the 2 economies. So in that sense, we've identified the ongoing cooperative sectors, but we've also looked at the future going forward, maybe 10 years or so.
So Australia may not be a huge market for Indian business, but the reverse works. I presume that's the incentive that the Australians would like to, harness, so as to speak. But is the old, whether it was politics that was involved in terms of Australia being so reliant on China, are they aware now that there is actually a necessity? Because we saw what happened in the past, when there was an attempt to form some kind of partnership against China. Australia went with China. But now, politically, is that issue sorted? Have they realized that?
So what's happening in Australian society has been that the Chinese have aggressively moved on to acquire certain assets which the Australians feel that should not have been conceded, and these are critical areas, and there the penetration of the Chinese state or companies has been enormous. There's also been tremendous political influence as far as the Australian Parliament is concerned, as far as universities is concerned, and generally decision making in particular. There are fears of meddling in the electoral process as well. And because of China's expansion into the Pacific, there is a certain amount of apprehension about Chinese activities going forward, especially the attempts to set up bases, for instance. So there, the Australians are working with Japan, USA, New Zealand, etc., to counter that. But as far as their own society is concerned, over-dependence on one particular country has brought about certain awareness that they need to ring-fence themselves. And so new laws have been passed by the Australian Parliament, making sure that the Australian government has a central role, the federal government has a central role, so that the Chinese cannot reach out to the state governments and
even if,
create their own
which
linkages.
they had in the past, I think Victoria.
That's right. So because of that, and because of the fact that China has rejected the Huawei, influence in Australia as far as the 5G is concerned, plus the statements that have come about because of interference of China in Australian affairs in general, has led to a certain deterioration in the political equation. And there we have now a situation that the Chinese have started boycotting a number of Australian exports into China, or delaying their imports through their ports, leading to huge losses for Australian companies. In turn, that has brought about a realization that they need to diversify and to find new markets for their exports, and also have new partners. That over-dependence on one particular country never pays dividends. So that realization has led to an increase of contacts between countries like India, Indonesia, ASEAN in general, and others that Australia deals with.
So, Ambassador, I mean, though it's traditionally the economy is dealt with in a separate silo, this is 2+2, which is defense plus foreign policy. Like your report talks about, it's the Australia Economic Strategy report. So, how important the economy is in the country's strategy. To sum up, would you say that the economy or the cooperation between India and Australia is extremely necessary strategically, apart from all the security angles that we're working on?
Yes, so Australia is an ideal partner, I would say, and India's path to development for the future, especially as far as our e-mobility program is concerned. And because of the presence of elements like lithium and cobalt, and also the collaboration that we can have in areas like hydrogen, in startups and in fintech, these are all crucial areas for the future of India's economy. And again, the necessities that are there in the Indian society and economy today, like drinking water, preservation of water, the circular economy, and safety, health and safety in our mines, the need to improve our sports facilities, stadia, and to make them useful through the year, not just during the seasons, for instance. These are all techniques which have been tried out in Australia. And talking about these techniques, for example, grid technologies, stabilization technologies, where you have a combination of various kinds of feeds, for instance, and then how you maintain a proper flow of electricity to your cities, an uninterrupted flow, remote monitoring through mechanized meters, for example. All this has been tried out in Australia because of the sparse population. Also, Australia has faced drought situations, scarcity of water, which India is also facing at the moment. So these are all lessons to be learned and good practices which can be easily adopted.
And where we can cooperate in everything except, I think, on the cricket field.
Yes, but we are cooperating a lot in the cricket field as well. And I mentioned to you about stadium management, for instance.
That's why I picked up
But
that.
sports medicine and training in sports is very important. In fact, nowadays it's not just the game, but also the techniques and the technology which goes into any game for all-round improvement. And we've seen that happening in Indian sport. There's a certain awareness which has come about. And we will see more of that happening here and more involvement of Australia in India.
Ambassador Wadhwa, again, absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you for sharing your experience and your expertise.
Thank you very much.
And you can send in your feedback on this particular show of Talking Point, or do keep track of all the news and developments and analysis through our social media handles, whether it's on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. This is StratNews Global. You've been watching Talking Point. I'm Amitabh Revi.